What is occurring is obviously, some policy initiatives announced through the election, and a few changes here and there from their couple of months now in governance. So without further ado, we'll get started. And as with all years, I just have to start off with a disclaimer. And obviously, the information we've got in here is publicly available. It's mainly garnished from the budget papers themselves. I will be expressing various views, but they're my opinion only. And of course, you shouldn't act ever on any advice without getting it specifically targeted towards your needs. So please make sure that if you need any assistance, contact us. We'll be always happy to help you in any circumstance. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the next little while with me as we go through this year's budget. As always, what I like to do is start with the agenda. And in this year's budget was pretty clear, was to pretty much get in the election promises. Now, like I say, normally a budget is delivered every May. We've had a couple of years of adjustment, but both due to elections where the budget was brought forward, which has wreaked havoc on my travel plans at times at that stage, but no more than COVID did, of course. So, this is probably, hopefully, the last time we'll be delivering this purely on the internet. I've already pre-booked, flights to come traveling and do these in person to, a number of cities next year in May. Hopefully they don't change the date of it now, but it's usually the second Tuesday of May, and, soon after we hit the road and start delivering it. But they wanted to deliver on their election promises in this budget. And we'll see that most of them, they've been able to do so, which is very credible and good. They've also been very, very specific to give a general weather warning. They're reminding us all that we're in turbulent times, inflation's rampant, there's a war, not that there's not one usually, but, that they're using that one with more emphasis than they did, for instance, with Iraq. They've got issues in regards to the economy with interest rates. So it's unusual to see, such an amount of care and concern about what might happen. In fact, for the first time in my career, and as you can see, I've been doing these budget seminars for 18 years, we had the Treasurer come out at the end of September when he had the end of year financial results come through and hold a press conference to say, hey, look, last year's results are pretty damn good, so please don't hold that against me if my results aren't as good as those. So he's gone to the opposite to say, hey, I'm probably not going to be as shiny, so it's not my fault. He's already setting that up a bit, but he's certainly warning us that we've got tough times ahead and roll up the sleeves and get ready for your part. We're also focusing heavily on cost of living relief. That's a big issue in Australia and globally. We'll talk about that in more depth as to the impact of inflation and the reality of that. But everybody in Australia is feeling the pinch. So there's a lot of issues there to be felt. And they're trying to target investment into areas that are not going to be inflationary pressure, but are going to offer best bang for buck in the economy. So they have some ideological ground on that, and time will tell. But some of it looks pretty good. I find it quite amusing that they're, saying that this is a budget that needs repair, and they're starting to repair it. They're obviously talking about the high level of debt that they've inherited. Ironically, a lot of that debt came from their last time in government, so I think it's a bit silly to be even talking about it, to be quite frank. The budget's actually in better order than most, but he wants to emphasise that he thinks he's getting it back into shape, and we'll talk about that and the relevance of that in a little while. But I suppose the key here is that he does want to manage inflation pressures. And you'll see in a lot of the announcements tonight, one of the ways he's done that is to announce things that are good and important, but not bring them until 1st of July next year, which is another reason why I'm somewhat confused as to the need of this budget paper, here in October, if virtually all the announcements aren't going to be taking into effect until July next year and could have been made and announced in May. So that's a little bit confusing to me, but politics is confusing, let's face it. And as usual, I try and pick a favourite saying. And this year, I thought the conservatism of this probably suited the occasion, and a solid and sensible budget suited to the conditions. So, he's probably right in that regard. He feels quite strongly in that. I can't disagree. And we'll work through the measures and see if you agree too. I'd like to all start off with the numbers. And you can see here, this is just the last few years. And, interestingly, I have left in what the Liberal budget was meant to be this year, had they got in, just as a reference point. But one of the things I'd probably draw your attention to first is the actual results that have come in now for 21-22, which was obviously 11 months Liberal, 1 month Labor. Originally, when the budget estimate came out, it was predicting $106 billion deficit. That was revised last year to just under 80 billion, but the actual result came in at a very impressive 32 billion deficit. Now, that's a fantastic result based on a significant uplift in revenues, and a less than expected, outgoing of funds. And this has been the pattern of the Liberal government for the last, 7-8 years. They've tended to be underestimating income, overestimating expenditure, getting a correction, and coming in, as you can see, substantially better than originally forecast. Now, I'll put that there just as a reference guide. It doesn't matter, that government's gone. But you can see this year they had forecast a 77 billion deficit, had they still been there. But the Labor government has come in at a better result with 36.9. Now, a lot of that is on the back of obviously the improved trading conditions. And that's where I think it's somewhat ironic that he held a press conference in September to say, hey, look, those conditions that got this 32 billion, great result, they were temporary and lucky revenue and lucky this and lucky that. But what he has done is he's folded on. So, Labor had a problem last time they were in power where they were very, regularly missing the mark on their budget forecast because they would tend to overestimate revenue and underestimate expenditure. And it does worry me a little bit that might be a trend, but this is a new treasurer. This is a new prime minister. They weren't in the previous crew. So let's give them the benefit of the doubt. And you can see it's good that we're getting the deficit down to the $36 billion mark, having been 85 and 100 during the COVID period. So it's good to be trending back in that right direction. And you can see in the next year, it's scheduled to go up to 44 billion. And we're looking to have, budget deficits for an indefinite period. There's certainly nothing in the conversation at the moment about getting to a surplus. And you can see they are predicting to have larger long-time deficits than were originally planned, which is a little bit concerning because the revenue growth is so strong. And this is, again, one of the things that I remind people all the time, again, regardless of whether you're Liberal or Labor, the thing that's staggering to me of Australia as a whole is if you look at the revenue stream, it's up this year at $584 billion. In 16-17, only 5 years ago, the government revenue was only 410 billion. So the revenue growth they've had in a very short period of time is phenomenal. Now, the problem is all governments love to spend what they receive. So it's very hard to get a balanced budget, even with those great new revenues. But the platform has been set by encouraging people in the workforce, getting wages up, getting income tax up, getting corporate profits up, getting corporate tax collections up, and set a very good revenue stream. And then when you supplement that with obviously the royalty streams and the incomes from the natural resources, etc., that's giving Australia a fantastic foundation. However, we are not only just a lucky country, we're a generous country. And as you can see, we are spending a heck of a lot more too. Just 5 years ago, we were spending $440 billion. This year, we spent 616, and that's set to escalate to 644 this year and 665 in the following year. So an additional $20 billion over and above what the Liberals had intended to spend. So again, put to productive, I don't have a problem with that. But you can see it's frightening that we're now accepting that the 30, 40, $50 billion mark is acceptable deficits for a government when we were thinking that 30 and 10 and 20 was outrageous in the old days. But with the GFC, when Labor took power, and with the COVID pandemic, when the Liberals took power, all the numbers, all the rule books, all the normal guidelines have been tossed out the window. Now, you can see here last year they had fantastic revenue growth for the second year in a row, 10% in 21, 12% in 22. And that's the conservatism of the forecast. But they always managed to keep their expenditure in check. You can see it was 5% or 6% under what it was the year before, and quite a bit under their forecast expenditure in the actual budget. It's popping back up now, but again, it's necessary. We have very high standards. We have the NDIS, we have social welfare, we have pensions, we have big infrastructure spend. So this money disappears very, very quickly. And the governments have an insatiable appetite on both sides of their floor to spend it if they've got it. Now, we are seeing GDP expected to slow down. It came in actually at 3.9 this year, which was a great result coming out of COVID. You know, it was forecast by Libs at 3.5. It's been reduced to 3.25 for this current year. And then it's going to reduce to 1.5. Now, this is a bit confusing to me, I must say. The government has come out and said, hey, get ready, things are going to slow down, you know, watch out, that could be problematic. But if you know that and you see that, I'm wondering why they haven't introduced very much stimulus measure. Now, they might argue that it's because they don't want to have it inflationary and have more pressure on prices. But I wouldn't have thought, you know, stimulus in economic growth, i.e. incentives, for instance, would have had much pressure there and wouldn't have necessarily been inflationary. So a bit confused as to when you're seeing that growth is going to slow, and obviously that has going to have an impact on your revenues, you know, why you wouldn't look to have some sort of incentive programs or tax incentives or deductions. But interestingly, even with the slowdown, they're still predicting a significant boost to revenues. And this is where I get worried about, is the past repeating itself? But we'll see. One of the key reasons that expenditure is down, as you can see, unemployment is down at record low levels at 3.8, 3.75%. You know, you can see that's down from a high of 6.9 during COVID, and even pre-COVID at 5.25%. Now, that 1.5% difference, of course, in Australia is a massive amount of savings in unemployment benefits, support training, welfare, you know, health costs, etc. So that's a huge reason why the budget has been recorrecting itself so quickly. And a lot of that was due to the fact that we had no migration during the last couple of years due to the borders being closed. And that's obviously caused pressures of itself in, you know, labour shortages, building shortages, all sorts of issues. So we're welcoming back those migrants, and that's why they are expecting the unemployment rate to sneak up a little bit as migrants come back in the country, and therefore there's less labour pressure, and some people choose not to work, or some job growth doesn't grow as much as the incoming migration. I don't tend to find that to be the case. I tend to find migrants come either skilled or with cash, and therefore need services, and are more likely to be customers than employees in many cases. But the government, having seen that, again, should be looking at ways they can keep that down if possible, because the saving is enormous, when it happens. And you see CPI, which is public enemy number one at the moment, it came in as 6.1 during the year, and is expected to be 5.75 this financial year. I think that's probably a bit soft, and you'll see that with the numbers that came out yesterday. And then allegedly is going to sneak back down to 3.5. Now, this is the big issue of the day, not just in Australia, but globally. We'll talk about it at length a bit later on, but I don't think there's anything in this budget that's addressing inflation, even though he's trying to say that, he's trying to monitor that and keep it under control and keep it in check. Just a quick note is the debt levels. The net debt level is meant to peak at about $766 billion in 25-26. It was originally meant to hit up at 980, but the fact that these big, $100 billion deficits have now, disappeared, that's a lot less than was originally expected. Gross debt will peak at about $1.2 billion, but that's a manageable level for a country like Australia. That's still keeping its debt to GDP ratio under 40%. And I always remind people, it's a bit like your house. The bank will happily lend you up to 80% of your house value. Well, GDP is a government's house value. So, anytime you're going 60, 70, 80%, that's quite within the safe levels. 40% where Australia is considered to be very conservative. And a lot of governments these days are sitting at 110, 120, 130%, which is dangerous, of course. So at the 40%, Australia's still got quite a lot of capacity, but we still want to try and get that down if we can. So overall, the numbers are pretty fantastic on what they are. They're going forward at a decent pace, but we'd like to see some contraction in these deficits. So it's a little bit disappointing that we haven't seen that, and they're going to stay out at that 50 billion mark, even when things are allegedly normal. One of the reasons that I think that's something that they will need to consider sooner than later is if you have a look at where they've got the most pressure. Now, so these are costs going up. Now, inflation being high, is a real big problem for the Australian government in particular. And the reason for that is that a lot of the welfare payments, the unemployment benefits, pensions, etc., are all indexed to inflation. So where that's normally been in the 2 to 3% range and quite affordable for the government each year to add 2 to 3% to its cost there, now that inflation's sitting at 6+, what that means is anyone on a pension, anyone on unemployment benefits is going to get about a 6% rise in their benefit each year. Now, of course, they're not going to feel that as a good thing because goods have gone up that much and therefore it's all gobbled up. It's not, like, oh, lucky me, I've got extra money. Yes, you do, but you also got extra cost. But to the government, that's a real outlay and it's a big problem. And you can see they're expecting to have above average growth in costs of that over the next few years. But the two ones that are really knocking them to pieces is NDIS, which is the National Disability Insurance Scheme, which is just a massive, massive bipartisan arrangement where they're trying to provide unmatched level of support to anyone who needs assistance in Australia. And the costs of that are blowing out considerably. And of course, interest. With Australia having $1 trillion debt, the problem there is, that was great while interest rates were sitting at 1% or 2%. But now that interest rates are up at 3s and 4s and 5s, the government's got a heck of a bill. Now, that's the same for every household in Australia. They're feeling it. But imagine if you had $1 trillion worth of debt, you'd be feeling a little bit more. And you can see that's a big escalation. And you can see, the escalation there in 2032, that's going to be about $30 billion a year of extra interest over what they were expecting at around the $15 billion mark. So that's a lot of non-productive money if those expenditure commitments don't bear fruit in some sort of either social dividend or economic dividend. And hence why, I think the government should be already thinking about, how do we get back towards a surplus? Because that interest bill is going to continue to escalate if you run that deficit and have to borrow that money every year extra in order to plug the gap. So I'm not sure it's a great idea to have a deficit-driven long-term strategy that's never worked out, that well for anybody. Even though you can afford it, you're just, certainly paying it down the line and making it worse for the next generations. Let's have a look at some of the key issues out of the budget. And the cost of living support is basically a five-pronged attack. They're increasing the childcare benefit. They see this as a massive social dividend. It gets particularly mothers back into the workforce. That's adding millions of hours of additional work. And you can see they're lifting the subsidy to 90% from 85%. Now, anyone who lives in Australia knows that even that 15% is quite expensive. And this is one of the things that does concern me, is the fact that childcare costs is incredibly high, and luckily there is the subsidy, because otherwise no one would be able to afford it. But because the government's chipping in the tip, no one seems to be keeping it in check. I'm not 100% convinced that it needs to be as high as it is, but that's the case. But you can see here what they are doing is making it very generous, that if your household income is less than 530,000, you're going to get those subsidies. And there's all sorts of mix depending on how many kids and stuff you've got. But I'll put that there because I find that quite interesting, that the government thinks that you should get a subsidy for childcare if you're earning 500,000 as a family. Yet every year when they talk about tax rates and lifting up the top threshold, they seem to complain if people earn more than $200,000 and they think that they're rich. So it's a bit of an oxymoron to me that in one hand here they're saying, hey, let's give it to everyone with family incomes of $500,000 or more. Yet they're saying, hey, we want to tax the highest rate to people that earn more than $200,000 because they can afford it. So it just seems to be a little odd paradox to me. They're also increasing paid parental leave. They're extending it out to 6 months, and they're going to make it easier for both parents to have a little bit of that time. The government currently reimburses the employer for the majority of that cost. It's set at a certain rate, and that means that everybody can obviously go home and enjoy that new child coming into the family, which is a good thing. I mean, I don't think too many people would argue about that. Medicare health cost is also being targeted. Currently, there's a $42.50 co-payment if you get various prescriptions. That's being reduced to $30, so that's $12 a time that'll be a saving, which will be extremely well welcomed. And affordable housing is a high target zone. We'll discuss the merit of that in detail later, because obviously we're very heavy housing focused at SMATS. Many of our clients are either would-be homeowners, are homeowners, or are landlords. So we will give that special attention a bit later. But these are the key things that they're tackling under the cost of living support packages. And again, trying to chip away and make it a little bit less costly. Put a little bit more in your pocket to cope with those other cost of living pressures, such as fuel and interest rates and all the rest. And of course, what they are trying to do is improve people's wages. They've just allowed the full CPI index to the minimum wage in Australia, and they're trying to give people more training opportunities and advancement opportunities to upskill, upgrade, get better jobs, and create better jobs in and around Australia. So that's something that they're trying to do. So, okay, let's see if we can get you to earn more, as well as maybe spend a bit less. If we start with the renewable energy is a great point. The government's his step right up to the mark here. It was obviously a hot potato during the election. The Liberals certainly fell short in that regard, and the Greens took advantage, as did a few of the others. But Labor have stepped into that fold and said, right, let's do this properly. And they've committed a 20 billion energy transition fund to get, particularly in the regional areas, get renewable energy, solar, whatever it takes to fund that and help it out. They're going to spend a fortune rewiring the grids to ensure that all these renewable energy platforms, wherever they may be, can get their energy into the grid economically. And there's been 800 million allocated towards savings on electric vehicles if it's underneath the current vehicles tax level, which is about $80,000. So you'll get tax reductions and a little bit cheaper an electric car. So that's something that hopefully they'll encourage you to. They're going to also spend quite a few dollars, trying to get emission reduction projects for the general car population as they're transitioning. They're going to introduce a lot more charging stations along the highways, and they want to, aim to bring 100,000 electrical home storage units into households. So that's a big plan. Now, this all replicates, what they did in the last time at office with the BATs, which didn't go too well. I would have thought that this would have been better to do when they did instead of the BATs, but we'll see what happens with this. The only thing that worries me with things like this, programs like this, again on both sides of politics, is that whenever a government tends to subsidise something, surprise, surprise, the cost seems to jump very much the same, the next day. So we'll see if that works, but at least people will be in there. Ironically, when I was a kid, everyone had a solar hot water system, and that sort of died off, but we're thankfully going back to it. And they're also going to spend some money to provide incentives for apartments to obviously find savings for both tenants and owner occupiers, and that will be a good thing. I mean, there's a lot of energy that could be saved in that space. The upskilling is a big thing. Obviously, a Labor government is very focused on employment. The union background brings that. They're bringing in TAFE as a fee-free for everybody. So $1 billion is going there, and it's going to create tens of thousands of courses. There's 770 million additional going into schooling across the country to help out and improve schools and get them with some mental health programs, for particularly the kids that have been through COVID, etc. There's $485 million going to create 20,000 university places for disadvantaged students. So that's going to ensure that if they can and they want to, they will be able to go to university. There's a $15 billion National Reconstruction Fund that's going out, and that's going to be interesting. It's going to look to invest in all sorts of manufacturing industry, help with upskilling and improving. There's $8 billion of new infrastructure projects announced in this budget to complement the carryover of about another 110 billion from the previous Liberal government. So that's a huge amount of activity going on all around the country. There's $5 billion, into regional growth programs. So this government is very committed out into the countries, and they see that as a genuine long-term solution, particularly for renewable energy, where they see that's where the space is. So they're very keen to support regional growth and bring people out there. And then the environment, they've really stepped up to the mark there as well as. So one of the reasons for that is that, welcome to government. They've just been landed a $3 billion bill for the latest floods in Victoria, still ongoing. Happen to be in Melbourne at the moment, but thankfully not underwater. So this is now the new norm. Even though they all say, oh, it's an unusual event, it's just El Nino. I don't buy that myself. I think we've definitely altered the climate, and we have to do what we can for it. I think there will be solutions, but we're going to have to be dealing with some of these messes for a lot longer. And I've always said for many, many years, nature always wins, and it's certainly winning out there at the moment. So we have to be more wise when it comes to that. They've committed bravely to a 43% emissions target by 2030 and a net zero by 2050. Now that's an aggressive target, but it's one that we all need to have. So I don't think anyone would condemn them for setting that out, and they're going for it. It has caused confusion in the energy markets and also speculation, and that's, I think, one of the key reasons why prices have gone up. I think the energy companies saying, look, we know we're on limited lifespan, let's get what we can. But we'll see what happens. There's a 1.8 spending on environmental heritage protection issues, including 200 million of that going to the Great Barrier Reef and $200 million going into a saving native species program, which again is critical. And this is especially after things like the floods and the fires. The native species get under massive threat during those times, and it needs the attention. Interestingly, last year I was very happy that we were finally seeing some money going into building some dams. I've been nagging on about we haven't been building dams for 15, 20 years, and they finally did. One of the things that they did in this budget, though, is they cancelled $4.6 billion worth of dam projects and said they weren't really good enough and they're going to review some of them and the other ones will get scrapped. So I thought that was worth putting there. So that's where a lot of this money is coming from. Again, I don't think that's a wise thing, particularly when you are going to get more and more rain all the time and you've got more and more people. You need to capture that water rather than send it down the river. There is 300 million of that being redirected to various water grid investments. Whether that'll be enough, I'd like to almost see an aqueduct being built somewhere or something like that. And then if we move on to health, again, this government is very, very generous when it comes to that. And they've certainly stepped up with their promises and delivered on that with $6 billion going out to hospitals and healthcare. Through that, co-payment reduction, and also with about $400 million going into urgent care clinics, which was one of their features of their campaign. There's $2.5 billion going into aged care. A big bulk of that is going into the funding of nurses to be in aged care clinics 24 hours a day, and also increasing the amount of care minutes per person per day up to 215. But again, this is one of those things that is not going to start until October 24. And that's not the 24th of October this year, that's 2 years' time. So, again, a big commitment, but a big delay before it comes in. There will be $540 million spent on oversight improvements in the aged care. We've just obviously had a Royal Commission. It didn't go too well. There's been all sorts of problems in the care industry, and the government needs to do that. Now, this is particularly problematic to me because the funding that these guys get is huge, and the cost of aged care is enormous. And I don't think we get great value for money in a general sense down Australia, but that could be fairly controversial to some. But I think we could certainly do it better. We're going to do it by throwing more money at it. I'm not sure that's the solution because, again, I'd like to have fixed the problem and then seen what the cost is rather than throw the money and hope that it improves. NDIS, as I mentioned, is getting really out of control. And so to the point where the government has recognised how important it is, and they've now funding $80 million a year, to fight fraud in NDIS, which is, I would say, fairly reasonably common, unfortunately. I mean, the duplication and the multiplication and the extra cost of the basic is really out of hand. If you've had any experience with NDIS, it can be quite surprising what everything costs, and you pay more than you need to, which I think is, again, one of the issues in regards to inflation, which we'll talk about later, is that if we set the new benchmarks at higher rates, then the market says, well, if you don't pay me, I'll go there and get more. And that's inflationary in itself. But it's fantastic to see this taken seriously, and I hope they get a whole bunch of really good accountants and get in there and muck them around. There's $1.7 billion over the next 5 odd years to fight domestic violence, which is a fantastic thing. And again, this is on the back of a significant amount of dollars and commitment from both sides of Parliament over the last 5, 10, 15 years. So it's certainly getting the attention and hopefully the results that are necessary. And the defence is also getting a lot of support and assistance out of this budget. They've also been having a look into suicide cases there from veterans. so mental health support, and pension support and medical support is being given a pretty good overhaul, which is very, very good and commendable. Some other announcements of note: there's $22 billion they found in savings, when they went through into their spending audit. So that's where a lot of the stuff that I've just mentioned has been costed from. And that included, getting rid of, consultants and advertising and all sorts of things. There's $1.2 billion going into, close gap measures, for the local Indigenous community. And very, very sincerely, positively, finally, they're going to have a voice referendum to make sure we can recognise them appropriately in the Constitution, etc. I can't wait to vote on that one. We've got a new National Anti-Corruption Commission. This has been, I think, unnecessarily, controversial. I think both sides, wanted it, and they just couldn't agree the terms. But at least it's now coming in, and we'll see the benefits of that if anyone's, fiddling the books. The pensioners are now going to be able to work a little bit more before it affects their pension, which will certainly, give them a little bit of extra money. And it's more psychological than anything. A lot of pensioners just don't like to have their pension reduced, so would rather not work than have their pension reduced. So it's fantastic to release that, so they've got the confidence and belief to go out and do a couple of hours and help out, make a few extra dollars, take the pressure off of them, and contribute to society in a good and productive way. The ATO is getting, quite a bit of money, a couple $100 million to go and fight, on a number of tax fronts, but most particularly with multinational tax avoidance. And visas which have been log jammed very, very poorly in the last few years, which is surprising since they did close the border. You would have thought they'd easily have caught up with everything, but that's been a bit of a debacle, I must say. But they are spending a lot of money to get that fixed. And they're also lifting the PR applications, up from 160,000 a year up to 195. So that's going to be a positive thing, bringing people in. They're backlifting some more, spending in the Asia Pacific in particular, to try and combat some of the influence that China's had with checkbook diplomacy. And the only way you can combat checkbook diplomacy is with more checkbook diplomacy, unfortunately. But that's just the way it is. So there's $1.4 billion to go into the region for support programs and to keep everybody happy. And one of the things I'm quite sad about is they're actually spending $218 million to get rid of the cashless card. I thought that was a very good program. I think it's a good safety measure. It just meant that, the card, limited some type of expenditure like cigarettes and booze, for example, because they got their benefits paid there. But, I would have liked that to have stayed in there, but it's been controversial to some. I just thought it was a positive thing. We'll have a quick look at affordable housing now. And one of the big programs was a new $10,000 target to build 10,000 new federal affordable homes, and the states have stepped up with a commitment to do a further 10,000 of their own. Now, these federal homes, it's about a $350 million program. I'm not a huge fan of this particular one, and the reason is that these affordable homes aren't an ownership program, but a rental subsidy program. So the government basically pays the difference between the market rent and the subsidised rent that the tenant has. I'm never in favour of that. Not that I don't want to provide affordable rents, but I would have thought that there's a better way, that if the government owned the homes, or share to buy schemes, or whatever the case is. So this is going to be temporary, but I think it causes bigger problems down the line. So it'll be good to have it, but I wish they had done something a bit better. They came out as a big headline and said, hey, we've had a big meeting with all the key stake players, and they've committed to build 1 million new homes over the next 5 years, which sounds like a really big headline, but I'll show you something in a minute that might change your view on that. But this is good insofar as that it is with community engagement, and they're trying to particularly get large institutional investors. Now, I'm in two minds about this, because I think it's great, obviously, to get the level of investment that's required, but I'm never too happy if institutions get in, because one thing I do know about institutions is that they're very profit focused. So again, if we're trying to get something to fix the problem, then we should be looking at how do we get people to lower their cost. And the easiest way to lower their cost is ownership and debt reduction thereon, so that they end up, one day not having any cost of living in that house. But this at least is a good, in principle, solution, and to get, supply in, because if you look at what's going on in the housing market, the key issue is supply. There's not enough supply, so this is what's required, is build more houses. And this is probably, to me, the best part of their policy. is the fact that they've committed to work with the states aggressively to look at what land can be released, particularly if it's good land towards, the city, so that we're not just releasing housing estates miles and miles out, that people don't tend to want to go there, if they have a choice. We really need high quality, medium density, in and around the cities. And there is a lot of land available to do that. And if not, a lot, there's a lot of opportunity to go from a single house to a 3 or 4 or 5, 6 unit, nice development. Being in Melbourne, driving around, that's happening quite a lot in the upper end areas. And that's the best way to increase supply. It's efficient, all the infrastructure's there. So we'll see what happens in the future. The first home buyer support program is something that I feel a lot more passionate about. I think this is the most important thing. And I spend most of my career begging my clients to help their kids into property. And that's certainly been happening. We've had an owner-occupier surge in Australia of recent time. It had been dropping in recent times and was heading down towards less than 60-70%. And so, it's now been a resurgence. And that's one of the reasons we've had such a strong property market and such a tight rental market, is because people have been moving from rental to ownership, which is fantastic for them, but it's one less rental property in the pool. And that's caused a great shortage in rentals that we talk about in a minute. But, it's a good thing to have. Now, first home buyers have got a couple of schemes, and the 5% deposit scheme is a carryover and enhancement from the previous government, but it's a great scheme. They get in the door with the 5%. Normally they'd have to pay very expensive insurance to get a 95% loan, but by having the government involved, that insurance is waived and that person at least has a chance. Now, that was particularly attractive while interest rates were low. Now it's probably a little bit concerning if you're a first home buyer, but everyone forgets rates are still at historically low levels. So it's still far better to buy than it is to rent, but you just have to be brave. And people forget that it's never been easy to buy a house. It's not meant to be easy to buy a house, but you need to get your first house to get going. Now, they've also introduced a co-ownership program, and I'm not such a big fan of that one, okay? That's where you can get in with a 2% deposit, so that means people are in the door, but what happens is the government will come and co-own with you. So if it's a new property, they'll go up to 40%. And if it's an established property, they'll go up to 30% ownership. Now, that's great because it gets you in the door. And most importantly, you only have to pay a mortgage on the non-portion that you own. So on the 60%, not the 40%. The government will pick up the tab on their share. But when you sell the house, they get 40% of the profit or 30% of the profit or whatever the ratio might be at that time. So it's good and bad. I do worry that this is too much of a stimulus. And it might, get people spending a bit more than they should, and they might be a little bit more generous than they would otherwise. But it gets people in the door, and whatever it takes, as long as they're relatively sensible. And the good thing is there is caps as to how far they can buy, and that depends on which state you are. But this overall, if you have a low deposit, is a good scheme for everybody. Again, I'm not overly concerned with interest rates being higher, but it's certainly something that they need to be more mindful of than when they released the program, concepts when interest rates were significantly less. Another good, measure that's come out of this budget is that they've reduced the current downsizer contribution into your super. They reduced it from what was 65 previously, had been reduced to 60, and they've reduced it further to 55. Now, this simply means that if you own a house and you sell it, you can put an extra top up into your superannuation as you head towards retirement, and therefore get a larger portion of your retirement pool on that tax advantage, tax-free status. Now, this is a good thing because it does encourage people to sell their houses that they may have otherwise hung on to, release some funds, usually tax-free because they've been living in it, and therefore plonk money into their superannuation to get a better retirement. And of course, with the property values that we've been seeing, a lot of people are doing that, buying a replacement home and still having lots of money left over to help the kids go on holiday, renovate, have a good life. And that's what we want. So releasing that cash is a good thing. Releasing that property is a good thing. Gets more activity in the community, particularly if that property can be released and turned from one house into 5, 6, 7 units, or maybe even more. So that's a good thing all around. I am particularly disappointed in the fact that they haven't talked about GST reform for new construction. And this is a particular bone of contention to me, because what a lot of people don't realise is that when you buy a new home, there's about 7% GST in the price, and then you also have to pay another 5% in stamp duty to buy it. So to me, this has been a double dip, and if it's a foreigner, there's even an additional stamp duty for being a foreigner, so it's a triple dip. And I think if the government was genuinely serious about affordable housing and increasing the supply and also lowering the cost, the easiest way to do that would be to say to the states, hey, you're not going to be able to charge GST on brand new housing because we need the stock and you're already getting paid from stamp duty. They shouldn't get both. So they should either get rid of stamp duty on a new house or they should get rid of GST on a new house. They should not be both. And particularly that's true when you look at the prices of some of these houses now. I mean, it's gone from 300,000, 400,000, 500,000 to 600,000, 700,000, 800,000, 900,000. And when you factor in a 7% on 900,000 and another 5%, all of a sudden that's $110,000 of government cost on a $900,000 property. That's over 10%. So if they're really serious about housing and making it affordable and encouraging people to build new stock, fix the GST or get rid of the stamp duty. You can't have both. And as a community, we need to start pushing that very strongly. The other thing that I'm quite disappointed at is that they actually doubled the foreign buyer fee this year. So if you're a foreign buyer, you pay an additional stamp duty to the state government, and then you also have to pay a foreign buyer fee to the federal government. Now that started originally at $5,000 up to $1 million and then $5,000 for each increment. They've now lifted that, up twice as much this year. It's crept up to 6,600, and they've doubled that to 13,200. Now you can see the impact of that is that's one of the reasons why we're not building as many houses and we don't have as much rental, because foreign investors were a critical part of the supply equation because they bought houses but were living overseas, so had to rent. Whether that was an expatriate or whether that was a foreigner, it didn't matter. That was the situation. But if you look at the facts, FIRB approvals peaked in 2016 at 40,000 new purchases by foreigners. Most of those were the apartments in Melbourne, right, that no one else wanted. But they provide a great rental stock and housing for students and young workers before they became family. But you can see as a result of them whacking more on the foreign buyer fee, whacking more on the stamp duty, taking away things like the capital gains discount for people living overseas, the amount of purchases this year dropped from 40,000 to 4,000 in just 5 years. Now, if you want a very simple answer as to why do we have a housing crisis, there it is right there. Because a lot of those foreign buyers, when they're buying it, that building wouldn't have been built had those foreigners not participated. So it's really been bad policy the way these people have been treated. And the Liberal government also brought in where you lost your capital gains tax, free status on your family home if you sold it. The combination of those has meant that foreigners don't sell, foreigners aren't buying, there's not as much rental pool, there's not as much rotation, and they need to really look at those policies if they want to fix affordable housing in a genuine sense. So that's where I think they've let themselves down. I like the fact that they've got more rental affordables. I like the first home buyer schemes, but in a few other areas, there's some pretty big deficiencies. If we look at, interestingly, in the 1 million headline, they've been bragging about this as a great achievement, but when you actually dig a little bit deeper, it's not really that big an achievement. We've actually been building about 50,000 properties a quarter almost forever. Now that obviously slowed down a little bit on the new apartments there for a while, but houses had the peak when the Liberal government brought in the incentives, and it's just been chaos, so that's naturally dropped off, but it's still running at 30,000. But you can see here, Australia pretty much builds 1 million new dwellings every 5 years anyway. So the target that they've set is a target that they've already been achieving. So I think it's great that they're announcing it. I think it's great that they've got a target, but I'm surprised that they've just literally set it at the same place. And it's a little bit of smoke and mirrors, but it looks good in the news. Interestingly, that doesn't commence until 2024 anyways, when we probably would have been building new houses. But the problem is now that we've got migration coming in, we're never building enough. And that's the issue. We haven't been building enough houses for our population growth and our prosperity, and we can't build enough in the areas that people want to be. Now, the other thing that we got to notice is that even though we've been building quite a few, the problem at the moment is they're not getting finished. So you can see we've now at the record high of dwellings under construction. Now, normally this should sit at a fairly decent pace, but it dipped during COVID, and then the stimulus came in. And now what's happening is there's so many delays because of things like COVID, because of supply shortages, because of too much activity all at the same time, that a lot of these are taken months longer than they should, and there's problems in actually the delivery. So there's an enormous amount of frustrated people in the building caper at the moment, both builders and owners. We're seeing quite a few builders go broke because these delays obviously massively impact their cash flows. The cost rises on fixed price building contracts massively impact their profitability, and nothing has been done to address any of those issues. So I do think they've missed one of the key elements here. I think that they've missed the opportunity to get foreign buyers in, and they've missed the opportunity to incentivize people to invest in properties. But that's probably because they're ideologically opposed to it in the first place. Investors do not push prices up, owner occupiers do. And we've got a high ratio of owner occupiers in Australia, and that's why we've got the most stable property market in the world. If we look at interest rates, it's a very interesting thing to me. And you can see here, this is an incredible escalation of interest rates at this point here. Now, I cannot in any way, shape or form justify the economics of the RBA's actions. Now they've gone from what was 0.1, and everybody knew that it would go up. That was never in question. But they've gone up at such a pace that it's unprecedented. We haven't seen 0.5 rate rises in Australia for a heck of a long time, not since way back. But they went 0.5 when they could have gone 0.25. Now, even if you argue that they could have gone 0.5 rate rises, I would have thought the prudent thing to do would do 0.5 rate rise, stop, pause, see the impact. Wait a month, maybe wait 2 months, see what happens. Do another 0.25, 0.5, wait and see. But instead, they just went bang, 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 and all of a sudden rates have gone up. Now, again, we're still massively under our historical averages. So I don't have a level of concern about where interest rates are at. Now, one of the reasons for that is because you must remember that when you get a loan from the bank, they qualify you not at the current interest rate, but at the current interest rate plus about 4% to make sure that you can cope and manage with rate rises if they happen. The reason being, they usually do. But to me, this rate rise is way too much. Now you can see every time they've gone up at that same scale, it's not too long before they go, oops, we probably mucked that up, and they've had to recorrect. And this is where I do think that it's a bit scandalous in my book, and no one is talking about the why or the justification. It's just saying, oh, well, they must know what they're doing. Well, maybe they don't. They went down too far and stayed down too long. So maybe they aren't as smart as we give them credit for, but this should be subject of some very strong review as to why they've gone up so aggressively so fast. Now, they say they're chasing inflation, but we'll talk about that in a minute. I'm not sure that that's the best tool. Their argument is in the main that it gives them some ability to adjust if things get worse, but they're the ones making it worse. So that doesn't fly in my argument too. But you can see they're not the only one. The US is doing the same. Even you can see Euro's gone up. Japan's still flatlining with it always has done. But I think this is too far, too fast. And I think we hopefully are seeing towards the end of the rate rises. If you wanted to put me on the spot for a prediction, I think they're likely to do another 0.25, 0.5. But I can tell you, I don't believe there's economic justification in order to do so. So we'll see what happens, but certainly brace yourself for higher rates. If you were wise and lucky enough to have fixed your rates, a year, 2 years ago, then that was the thing to do. And we were begging people to do that. People have been fixed at 2%, but they're going to come out of their fixed rates in the next 6, 12, 18 months, 2 years. And again, prevailing rates will probably be about there now. It's probably too late to fix your rates because the fixed rates are now higher than the variable. So I would probably personally prefer to be in variable at the moment until fixed rates start to moderate a bit. And that will happen, because if you look at the trends, what goes up comes down, what goes down goes up. We've gone up, we might go up a bit more, but I think we'll probably come back a bit more too. And don't forget, the government should be putting the RBA under more pressure than anyone, because the government's the biggest borrower in the country right now. So we'll see what happens. It's going to be very, very interesting in regards to interest rates, because I don't think we're doing it for the right reasons. So it's going to be interesting to see if they do the right thing or continue to do what I think is the wrong thing. What that has had an impact is obviously the dollar, and the Aussie dollar has just fallen off the shelf lately and almost hit towards 60 odd cents. It's just bounced back recently, but I also find this quite amusing. Now, part of this is obviously, the reason that they love the US dollar is flight to safety. And that's particularly true at the moment in Europe, because there's upheaval and a war going on there apparently. And so, the US dollar is a popular currency in any crisis, but that always cracks me up, because it's the most broke government in the whole world. So I don't understand why it's still considered to be a safe haven. It just so happens that there's way more people want to trade it than anything. I think the dollar has gone down too far and is now heading back to where it should. I've always been, of the opinion that the natural range for the dollar is 70 to 75 cents. And you see it stayed in that range for most of the year. I don't see this as a trend. I see this as just a flip. But let's see what happens. But I think it's now heading back in the right direction. And as things tend to normalize out, as they usually do, the dollar will probably come back, I think, towards the 70 cents. But it's a commodity. It can do anything. So we'll have some fun and monitor that in the next little while. Let's have a little bit of a closer look at inflation. And one of the reasons that I'm not worried about inflation, and I think the RBA has gone wrong, is if you have a look, it's at crazy high levels at 7.3%, okay? But if you look at where it's coming from, the large portion of it is coming from housing and then food and then transport. So the big drivers are housing, food and transport. Now, theoretically, we shouldn't be too worried about housing for a couple of reasons. Number one, it's a fact that pretty much 70, 80% of Australians own a property. So if housing's gone up, your values have gone up. So you've had an inflation hedge. So you shouldn't be too perturbed about inflation if you've made money on your housing. And particularly you can see Sydney, and I think all the houses in Australia last year, the national average was near on 20% growth. So that's going to be a natural inflation hedge straight away for you. Now, food has gone up a lot, and a large portion of that is the fact that we've had, such consistent and regular, interference through floods and fires. Now, that's something that to me, okay, is naturally causing it, but it's not a normal economic condition. It's something that is happening as a result of a one-off occurrence. Now, it's happened more than one-off. That's the only issue, but it's not surprising to see inflation have a boost. And same with transport. A large portion of that is fuel costs, but also flights. And what you're seeing is in the flights in particular, I think some of the flights are higher than normal because a lot of things that are going on, in almost every category, is also a fair bit of COVID correction. A lot of people that were not making money during COVID finally got their customers back, trying to charge a few extra dollars in order to recover some of the losses. So the reason I'm saying all of those things is that, I wouldn't be as concerned about inflation if I was a Reserve Bank, because I think there is a logical reason for it to happen post-pandemic. Now, obviously, you don't want it to become an ongoing trend, but the irony I find is that if you put interest rates up, you're contributing to the inflationary problem, because interest is part of the housing cost, the cost of being a mortgage or a renter. And of course, everything else, if you've got borrowed money as a business or whatever, then that's pushing your base costs up. If your employees then say, we need a pace rise, that does it. So you sort of spiral out of control pretty quickly. And hence, I would have been waiting and seeing, and I would have been, factoring in all of this weird stuff that's gone on, not just this last 3 months, 6 months, but this last 3 years, where, it's not surprising the world will take some time to figure out what the heck it should do in a post-COVID world. Now, if you have a look at that, I think we are that classic dog chasing its tail. It doesn't realize that it's its own blooming tail. So this COVID correction, that could still be going for another 6, 12, 18 months, because COVID is predominantly in the rearview mirror, but it's not totally extinguished. And I do think there's a lot of price point adjustment to recover that, as I mentioned. And I think, we have to either, as a community, say that's fair enough, or as a community say enough's enough. But we need to start looking at that. And those, contributing factors all around. And even if you want to, believe that the war in Ukraine is having the massive impact that it has on global prices to the extent it does, and I'm skeptical, I must confess. But, you'd have to factor that in. So why would you be worried about it if you can identify the cause? You would have to factor that in and say, let's not hurt everybody for something that they don't have control on and that is logical and rational and theoretically could be short term. Now, this comes down to all sorts of things like the floods and the fires, but we have to recognize that there is going to be that cost adjustment, and therefore we don't need to throw the baby out with the bathwater. These wage uplifts, that are going to be asked for, because everyone's saying, oh, it's costing me more, I need more. Again, we become our own inflation worst enemy. We're contributing to the cause, each and every one of us. We're all inflation lifters. So we have to try and hold stock. And we do have capacity, particularly in Australia, and particularly more, some people more than others, but we have to be able to be sensible about the argument at the moment. And as I mentioned, lifting interest rates, which is now going to put pressure on, both owner occupiers and landlords, and the landlords will pass the pressure down to the tenants, and the owner occupiers will pass the pressure down by having less, spending money, and therefore, contracting the economy. That might achieve the result that the RBA wants, but we've seen from their history that they tend to overcorrect upwards and then have to overcorrect downwards. And consistency and reliability would have been a far better pattern. So a slow ascent would have been, would have been much better than the steep rise that they threw us under. And I think the other thing that's not being talked about is how much of this inflation is actually profit rather than cost. I am not convinced, particularly if you look at oil, for example, the fact that it goes up doesn't mean that the cost of production went up. It means that someone is willing to pay a higher price somewhere in the world, and therefore instantly it gets adjusted. And that really gets up my goats. And you can see proof of that in the profits of the corporations that are putting their prices up. But margins in the corporate world these days have got way, way bigger than they ever were before. And the percentage of GP profit, gross profit, the percentage of net profits are higher than they've ever been. Corporate profits are higher than they've ever been. And no one seems to be checking that or caring. And we as consumers have become so generous in our willingness to pay that it shocks me sometimes. I mean, it's just amazing that we're willing to pay $3, $4 for a bottle of water or a can of Coke, and $5,000 for a watch and all this sort of stuff. And when we do those sorts of things, you can't blame someone for saying, hey, if they'll pay it, I'll charge it. But that's driving inflation too. But I'm not sure if we can get that back. We're also seeing across the globe more and more government contracts going out for more and more value. And again, when those people are getting those contracts, they're hiring labor at much higher rates than they perhaps would if it was a private contract. What they charge you and me for doing something at our house is different than what the government would pay. So the government needs to start introducing some checks and balances to say, are they actually paying market rate or are they paying government rate? Because with the amount of government expenditure on infrastructure projects and new development and things like that, that's setting the bar higher in the marketplace across the world. And I think at some point they're going to have to take a step back and say, hold on, are we being too generous and should we pare it back? And again, they can see the profits that a lot of these companies are getting because they're public companies, but no one seems to want to do that. And therefore, it does beg the question, normally the market would sort of say, hold on, that can of Coke at $4 is too expensive, I won't buy it. Okay, and then next week you'd see Coke on special, get 2 cans of Coke for the price of 1. And that would be normal market adjustment. But I think we're getting a bit out of hand, so are we really going to be able to get the market back where we say, hold on, that's not an acceptable price to us? Or is everybody going to keep pushing their price out and saying, that's my price, take it or leave it? It'll be an interesting thing to watch over the next 2, 3, 4 years. The only thing that I do know is that, you know, the law of supply and demand will still be the dominant factor, and that will eventually do it. You know, if you can't sell your goods, you'll have to reduce them. If you can't sell your services, you'll have to reduce them. And so we'll see what goes on. But I do know, particularly for Australia, that demand is going to stay pretty damn strong. We've got a very high disposable income. We're the highest net savers in the world. We're the highest average weekly earners in the world. We've got a great lifestyle. So, you know, we can afford to pay a lot of the things that we do. So it'll be an interesting experiment to see whether the market says, oh, because my interest rates went up, I'm not going to buy that as often. So unless you sell it to me cheaper, I'm not coming back. And whether the market will then listen and then adjust the price accordingly, which is when inflation corrects. Interest rates aren't going to do it. You know, they do it maybe by saying less disposable income, be more careful, but the market has to do the adjustment. So that's going to be very interesting for me. And that's how the only way we'll get inflation under control. But there's a lot of wild cards in there. If we have a look at migration, you know, the budget has uplifted the migration from 160 to 195. And you can see it's starting to come back. Now, they thought we'd go to negative population growth. I didn't believe that, and it didn't happen. We kept population growth during the COVID years even. And we're back now at 0.9%, which is, you know, not quite up to the previous high levels, but it's certainly up there. And of course, this is important for a couple of reasons. Number one, it should, you know, soften the labour squeeze that we've got in Australia because we've now got more workers, and that should make things a lot easier for everybody. But it's also important because these are more consumers. So if you imagine, we've already got strong demand for housing, we've already got strong demand for groceries, we've already got strong demand for everything. These are more mouths to feed, more houses need to be built, more beds to sleep on. So we're going to have even more demand pressure, which has always been Australia's secret of success. This population growth has always been why Australia stayed in positive, you know, economic growth. So this is going to, I think, keep us out of recession, but could cause a few issues and keep that inflationary pressure. But again, if you can identify why there's inflationary pressure, you shouldn't necessarily have to respond to it as aggressively as the RBA is doing. And just to demonstrate that, you know, what I should point on, as you can see, it's, you know, Queensland has been the massive benefactor of the high prices in New South Wales and Victoria and the lockdowns, and its population growth is off the charts compared to everywhere else, twice the national average. And, you know, and hence that property market there is going to be a phenomenal, you know, producer in the next couple of years, because population growth is still the most dominant stimulus to property growth. And so that being twice the average, mark my words, Queensland's going to have a very good run. And just here, just graphically, you can see here, this is where population, you know, for migration went into negative during migration, the COVID years, but the population growth stayed pretty much above the line, only went under for a very short period of time, but it stayed positive growth and is now kicking back up to pre-COVID levels, which is, you know, good for the country, you know, but will be an interesting challenge economically. So we'll see what happens. If we look at property prices, you know, finally they're taking a breath. There's obviously a lot of speculation out there that property prices will fall off the cliff. I do not believe that will occur. I think what we are seeing is just a little bit of normalization. I think particularly in some places like Sydney, I think people were paying over the odds for properties, you know, because they were desperate to buy. And hence, you saw, you know, the prices, they scoot up heaps, went up 10% year on year, but literally up till December of 21, the Australian property market in every capital city went up over 20%. And that's the first time we've ever had that happen all at the same time. We've had times where one city did 20 and everyone else did 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, but never did they all do over 20. And you see the growth that some of them are still experiencing. Brisbane in particular, Adelaide, Canberra, these are the people that are selling up at high value Sydney prices and going off to those markets, buying twice as good a house for half the price and still having a lot more cash left over. You know, and you see, you know, Melbourne is, you know, coming off a little bit and has grown a little bit slower. That's because it had, you know, a little bit more, you know, apartment market that, you know, had, you know, was not needed when all the students left. But even that's being sucked up a bit. And we're seeing, you know, a little bit of softening off in those markets, a couple of percent, but nothing compared to what the growth has been. And I don't think it's going to be long before that bottoms out, because the migrants coming back in, the confidence returning as interest rates stabilise, and the demand that people have for owner-occupied homes is going to push these back to modest growth. I don't think we're going to see the record growths that we had, but we'll be back at 2, 3s and 4s in no time at all. But you can see the long-term averages are still quite consistent, and that's why we never get excited on a 20% growth, because that's lucky. You obviously right place, right time, you're happy, but don't think that's ever going to be consistent, because you can see the 5-year average for Brisbane is 8, and that's after factoring in a big growth lately. Even with Sydney having such a great run over the last 5 odd years, the average growth over the last 5 years is still only 5%, 9 over 10, which is enormous, but 5 years only 5. So it's not as big as some people realize, but the fact of the matter is 5% growth on the price points in Sydney is still an enormous amount of quantitative return. So that's been pretty damn good. But I think Brisbane's going to do particularly well. I think Adelaide's doing really well because people are finding out it's a great place to live. I'm loving Perth for the value. It's crazily cheap. And the other places like Canberra, the retirement zones of Sunshine Coast, Gold Coast, Hobart doing particularly well because that also is a retirement option for particularly Sydney-siders. I think they're all going to do pretty well, but there's a lot of new money coming into Sydney. There's a lot of new wealth. I think the Sydney and Melbourne markets are going to do fantastically well. But as we've always said, in the livable property sector, junk is still junk. Be careful about that. And we saw that with Melbourne. We've been warning people for the last 5 or 10 years not to buy small apartments. We call them stops, small, tall, and overpriced. Now, they've gone down 20, 30, 40%, but that's not just because of COVID and the market. That's because they were probably overpriced and undesirable at the time. So you still have to make sure you get the nicest property you can afford in the best area that you like, and then enjoy it at whatever price you do, and then let time and reality do its thing, and you'll be fine. One of the reasons that I'm so confident and remain confident in the market is that the numbers never lie. And if you look at this again is unprecedented, area for Australia. The vacancy rate is below 3% everywhere except Melbourne. Now, Melbourne's vacancy rate is only high because they had a lot of exodus for students, etc. But, even that's coming down. It's come off 0.6 in the last quarter, and it's down 1.7 in the last year. So this is showing you that there's little in the pipeline. Now, that might be softened a little bit by the fact that there's so many houses that are almost finished and will hopefully soon finish. But we're still going to have struggle in that housing market for the next 6, 12 months to get those properties finished and delivered. So this tightness is going to remain. And even when that supply starts to come into the market, now that migration has restarted, as soon as one is finished, there's going to be 2 people wanting to live in it. So I think we're going to have a prolonged period of positive activity in the Australian property market because the supply is so tight. And even with the bold prediction of 1 million houses in 5 years, when you realize that that's how it's always been, then that's not going to have a material impact on the market in any case. But hopefully there will be cheaper options for people. They just may not want to be out in those areas where those cheaper options are. And it's going to be interesting to watch how choice comes into it. But overall, I think the property market is going to stay very, very safe and very, very strong in Australia because of supply and demand pressures. Strong demand, soft supply, still a long time to get approvals. Hopefully they get in there and make more land available, and then it'll take a bit of pressure off, but it's still hard to get the good stuff. And you can see as a result, look at the rent increases. Now, again, that's inflationary in itself, but a lot of people forget that in COVID, a lot of the rents went down or were subsidized or even written off. So this is a little bit of that COVID catch up that I was talking about with inflation, and we're seeing that everywhere. But this is not landlords gouging. In many cases, we're seeing tenants say, I'll pay this, please give it to me. I'll pay more than you're asking. So this is not necessarily just someone being a horrible landlord and saying, you've got to pay more, but this is just the simple fact of the market that there's a huge amount of demand caused by the lack of supply, caused by the increase of owner occupation, and there's very little rental pool out there at the moment. So we'll be looking for a little bit of relief, but it could take a while to come, and the property market stays nice and strong. Finishing off, well, highlights for me, I'm actually really, really pleased that they kept restraint. I think they could have gone crazy with the checkbook, but they kept it pretty much in mark. And they did most of their spending initiatives through savings, which is, to be commended. They've kept all of their promises from the election pretty much. I think they got caught out on the fact that they said they'd give everyone $275 towards their electricity bill. That seems to be the only one that's haunting them, and no doubt they'll probably find that money sometime soon. I think the fact that they have tried to be, as targeted as they can with these choices is a good thing, and the fact that they've recognised their core values of childcare, aged care, etc., is to be commended. I think that they actually held the summits, listened, and then tried to implement. I think it was a great thing. I'm not sure if all the people at the summits were the right people. I don't think they had invited too many normal people. I think there are a lot of big corporations and a lot of big, representations, but I'm not sure too many average people got there. But regardless, at least they're willing to listen and they're willing to implement. And I'm very, very happy that they're, become environmentally conscious. Now, this is both environmental as in, planet environments, and environment as in economic environment. So they're aware of both elements and they're trying to find the balance. And I think they're doing a pretty good job. They're obviously recognise that there could be some pretty rough seas ahead, and they're trying to batten down the hatches and get ready for it, which is to be commended, and we'll see how it goes. And I'm so rapt that we're going to finally have a referendum. I just do not understand, in my little head, how it's taken so long to get there, but let's see what happens. In the lowlights, I'm quite disappointed and surprised that they're not thinking forward to saying, hey, look, we recognise the importance of a surplus, especially when you're carrying this much debt. I think that should have been at least in the conversation. I think I don't like the way that we're doing support packages, i.e., more discounted childcare, subsidised rents, things like that, rather than incentive to grow. I think, I'm a great believer in incentive over support. Support is necessary, but I think Australians get a lot of support as it is, and I would have liked to have seen a bit more incentive, especially when you consider the growth is expected to slow. We do need some incentives to come through. But again, I'm not too stressed about this because the big test will be in the May budget next year. Okay. The lack of real energy was a big issue in the economy at the moment. And, they've brought in really good packages to create renewable energy, but a lot of these things are going to take 5, 10, 15 years to, even bear any little bit of fruit. I would have liked to have seen some aggressive policy about managing the current energy supply, which, believe it or not, there is loads of energy. It's just these guys that now control it don't want to turn it on unless they get paid more money. And this is why, again, if you've known me for any amount of years, you'd know that I'm a socialist at heart, and I'm devastated that we privatise power and water and, genuine government services. That should never, ever have happened. We need those things. They're essential services, and they're always best in the community ownership so we can control costs and be more efficient. It's not good in the open market. Very, very disappointed that we didn't see GST reform on housing. It's an instant, saving. It would have saved, buyers, particularly first home buyers, at least 5, 6, 7%. And it could have been a quick solution. But the greed of these state and federal governments from the collection they get from, the property market is off the charts, and that needs to be addressed. And with land tax, the next on the agenda at a state level. And I'm just a little bit apprehensive, not without being too greatly concerned, that history is repeating itself with generous forecasts for growth, that may or may not occur. So I like to see these guys hit their targets. I like to see them come in a bit better than expected, especially when you're talking about deficits of $40, $50 billion. It's nice to be on the soft side of that. So I'm hoping that their numbers are more, accurate than they've been in the past, and they've found a new way. And I'm hoping that Australia stays prosperous for them and everybody else. On that note, I had to give it an assessment, and for all the reasons just mentioned, I've given it 8.5 out of 10. I think it's not too offensive, it's not too generous, it's not too crazy. It's it's basically just we promised, and here it is. And I think we can see that they are in control. They're listening, and we're moving forward, and hopefully they know where they're going. And then it'll be a very, very interesting budget in May, with another 4 or 5 months, 6 months under the belt with all this chaos. It'll be interesting to see where we're all sitting in that time. On that note, you'll be pleased to note that I'm finished. Thank you very much for your attendance. I hope you enjoyed that. And we'll pass you on now, and we'll take some questions. thumbs up on this for Dr. Chalmers' first budget. And thank you very much. And of course, SMATS Group, we're always here to help you out. And if you need anything, come and check us out. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Steve. Another really insightful budget review. Thanks to everybody as well for sending through your questions. We've got quite a lot. We will try and get through as many as we can, but rest assured, if we do run out of time, you'll receive a copy of tonight's webinar along with all the questions and answers within the coming days. Before we get started into asking Steve all those questions, we would like to offer anyone a free initial tax consult. So to take advantage of that, you can either jump onto our website, which is www.smats.net, or alternatively, you can email paul@smats.net. Okay, Steve, ready for the questions?
Fire away.
All right. Is there any update of the residency rule?
No, nothing mentioned at all in this budget on the residency rule. There's been a great void of silence on that one. There was, in the budget papers, there was a number of measures that the previous, from the previous government that they'd said they're not proceeding with. I looked for that, hoping that the residency rule would be on there. It wasn't, but they have committed to obviously, discuss it before implementing. But at the moment, there's no draft legislation. There's nothing on check. But I'm sure that now that this budget's been done and with the next budget forming soon, that we're going to have that come back strongly in the conversation in the next couple of months.
On that as well, do you envisage that many of the expats that return back to Australia, I think there was around 600,000 through COVID, may look at expatriating overseas again?
Yeah, look, it's going to be interesting. There's as an expatriate myself that's come back, I mean, I think they're in different categories. There's the older ones like me that have come back because it was the right time to come back. There's some that were forced back, and there's some that can't get back away. But I think that, I would probably suggest that 30 to 40% will probably head back overseas given the right opportunity. But, that's particularly of the under 45 bracket. The over 45 and particularly the over 50, 55 bracket is probably more likely to hang around. But, if you look back at historical traditional numbers, usually about 80 to 100,000 expats returned to Australia every year before COVID. And, simultaneously 80 to 100,000 expats left for the first time and went abroad. So we've always had genuine equilibrium, in the market. And I think we will return to a similar position of that. The world is still, a big oyster. It's still got great opportunity. Australia has opportunity, but there are certainly, other options overseas. And we're lucky in Australia. We're in the best probably place in the world, but you never notice that if you're living in it. So the grass is always greener on the other side. And a lot of people particularly like to go and check it out. And of course, saving for a deposit still is very, very difficult in Australia. So if you do have the good fortune of being in a reasonable expat position, one of the big advantages is travel, but the biggest advantage is the fact that you hopefully can save a little bit more because of lower taxes and things like that. And that puts you ahead financially. So I don't think the lure of expatriate life will ever end, but it certainly comes to a close at your various time in life. And I think COVID accelerated a few people in that relocation, and we're starting to through a little bit of affluence, understand the importance of family over career and that a bit more than it used to be.
What about the political climate overseas as well? Obviously, the war with Russia, and there's more, Indo-Pacific tensions. Do you think that would be a deterrent for expatriates?
I'm not convinced. I mean, people forget we had a 20-year war with the Americans in Iraq, in Afghanistan. There's always something going on somewhere. I mean, obviously, you can't underplay what's going on in Ukraine, and it's diabolical. But it just shocks me that everyone's willing to stand on the sideline and just point a finger rather than going in there and stopping it. But there's always some nonsense going on somewhere somehow. Hopefully you're not close to it. I don't imagine anyone's going to take up an assignment in Kiev anytime soon. But there is still lots of opportunity in Europe, even with the threat of what's going on. There's opportunity in the US and Asia, even with the threat of what's going on. So it might be a no-fly zone over in that particular area, but there's still a lot of other places you can land.
All right, next question. There's lots of initiatives been announced around healthcare and housing, but how will this be possible to achieve all of this with labour shortages?
Well, it's going to be a challenge, but you can see, like I said, that $1 million target is a bit of a furphy because that's what we do normally. The wild card is obviously, the migration. The migration usually brings in a fair chunk of skilled labour, and that's what we've been missing in Australia. We've normally had, about 100,000 to 150,000, skilled labourers arrive every year, and they haven't turned up for the last 2-3 years. So, it can quickly remedy the situation, and the government is committed to fast track processing of skilled migrants. So it can turn around very, very quickly. So a little bit of combination of finishing some stuff off and getting some new workers. The big issue is going to be more around materials than labour, I think. There is enough labour. It's just, sometimes it's hard to get them to do it and do it first. I mean, the thing that shocks me being back in Australia is that, the amount of times, when I get tradesmen out to my place, very few of them can get the job done right the first time. The inefficiency in some trades just baffles me, having come back to Australia after a long time abroad. And when you find a good tradesman, geez, you never lose his number, I'll tell you that much. You treasure that like gold, but a lot of them just come out and don't do a highly good job and take a long time to not do it. But we'll certainly get some more skilled labour come in. I think we'll certainly, they're at least having things like the employment summit and stuff. For the first time in a long time, we're at least talking about things like productivity and capability. That's been off the agenda for a long time. We've just been filling shoes. So I hope we become better at what we're doing, and it's not just a few really good workers. It's a higher level of consistency throughout.
So on that, with these new builds, you mentioned skilled labour, rising costs of materials, supply issues. Will that lead to increased housing? So will affordability of housing still continue to be an issue? And do we need to really be careful buying off-plan or new house and land packages because of defects?
Look, I don't think you need to worry about defects because they all get fixed up. You've got great consumer laws and stuff. And look, the thing, and to be somewhat controversial here, which I'm pretty good at, I've never believed and still don't believe that we've got an affordability issue in Australia. There is affordable housing in every state. The problem that we have is that we've created a society that wants choice in the affordable equation. So, for example, I could go live in, a country town and I can afford a house easily, but I don't want to go there. I want to live in Toorak in Melbourne, So why isn't there a house that I can afford in Toorak? Well, there never was a house that a normal person could afford in Toorak. Not today, not yesterday, not 50 years ago, not 100 years ago. But we've conditioned ourselves that we want the best and we think that we should get it straight away. I mean, if you go back culturally, every time that we, in the past, you used to, buy a horrible house and then sell that and buy a little bit nicer and a little bit nicer and a little bit nicer. And hopefully after 7 or 8 houses, you finally got to be where you wanted to be. Now everybody wants to go straight to go and say, no, I want that best house the first time. So I do believe that there is affordable housing. It's just not desirable housing. And because we've created a society, and this is global, where we expect the best from the first moment. And in many cases, if you've got the support of the financial support of your parents, or, so many young people now are earning very, very good wages, and, in the digital economy, they can, make money on all sorts of weird things. We're seeing wealth, at younger than we've ever seen. They can afford it, they want it, they have it. So I'm not ever worried about affordable housing. I'm worried about people, being able to compromise. I think compromise is a word that got taken out of the English language about 10, 15 years ago. And we might have to find it now because you don't get choice. And that's the issue with house prices. You get economically shut out. You're not any other way. But, I think that's going to be a challenge as a society more than as a financial challenge. I mean, people forget that most people could never afford a house in somewhere like Toorak ever, right? But now they're saying that means it's unaffordable. I don't fall into that basket.
So we've seen some monumental increases in housing, particularly in like Brisbane and Adelaide. Why didn't Perth experience the same sort of growth?
I can tell you very easily, it's because Mark McGowan sat on the border and said, rack off, you can't come in here during COVID. I think the fact that, that it was seen in the East Coast that he snubbed the country and made everyone feel unwelcome, that made everyone say, oh, we were thinking about there, but no. I think it's the best kept secret. When people eventually lose that attitude and come and see how good it is in Perth, being a very biased, person towards West Australia, the value, the quality, the lifestyle, the lack of rain, I'm telling you, Perth's a winner.
There has been in the news this week speak about a predicted 20% property value decrease over the next 12 months. Do you think that may happen?
I don't believe that'll happen. I think the biggest decrease we ever saw in the Australian property market was during GFC, and that was something like 6%. And that only happened for a quarter. The reason we never see massive declines like, 20% is because, people don't sell. It's not that theoretically the price doesn't necessarily go down, but it only gets recorded as going down if a transaction occurs. Now, when you consider that there's very limited supply, that someone is going to sell a property, they've got to go and live somewhere else. Okay. Now, there's nowhere else to live. So, I don't think you'll see massive reduction on paper, and I don't think it's going to happen anyways. And I can tell you the demand for properties that come on the market, particularly in the desirable areas, is still well in excess of supply. What you've got at the moment is a bit of a pause. If you imagine 6 months ago, everything was more or less the same, except interest rates have changed and sentiment, more importantly, has changed. And when sentiment goes, that's when it's hard to keep confidence. And when confidence isn't there, buyers won't pay a premium and sellers, can't get, their asking price. So, it makes it tough. But there is so much pent up demand that, I don't think you're going to see massive falls, but you will see normalization. I have my theory called the idiot's premium, where there's certain times in the market that people are paying more than something is worth. And that's usually 5 or 10%. And it's not uncommon when a market cools that you see that idiot premium disappear. And it looks like the market has fallen 5 or 10%, but it hasn't really. It's just the guy who was paying 5 or 10% more than the market is no longer there, and we're back where it should have been. So you will see probably a 4 or 5 or 6% fall generally, but I think you'll find that it'll hold the line, and the scarcity and the demand will keep it safe and stable as it has for many, many years.
Your hot tip on where the best state or best territory for an investment property?
Anywhere that a Sydney sider with a lot of cash loves to live in retirement.
I'm guessing Queensland.
Queensland is going to do exceptionally well. It's definitely going to be an above average performer. I think you can see Adelaide and Hobart have been massive benefactors in that as well as. And I think Perth will eventually get its share once everyone forgets that they weren't allowed in previously. But if anyone comes on a holiday, I'll pick you up at the airport and I'll show you why it's the best place to live.
So many of us fixed our interest rates while they were super low, but now we're, facing the fixed interest rate, the terms to expire soon. Do you envisage interest rates will start decreasing sort of mid to end next year, or is that just too hard to predict with this crazy global world?
Because I don't think they're making decisions logically, but certainly that they shouldn't have gone up as quickly as they did. And I think, they need to come back to a place where they stabilize for a little while. And I think they will have found that they overcorrect, but, I don't think they'll go back to where we were at 0.1. I don't think we'll ever see those days again. I mean, I wish we would, because it was marvelous, right? But I can't ever see, and I hope that we never have an event similar to the COVID pandemic that requires it. I don't think we'll ever see interest rates that low ever again. And people forget that interest rates are still on the low side of our averages, on the very low side of our averages. So, I think the new norm will be in that 3.5 to 4.5 range. So I think we'll see maybe we head up towards 5, 5.5 for a little while. and then it'll probably drop back towards 4.5s, in the not distant future. And particularly, they need to keep it stable if they want to get inflation under control. So high interest rates are all right as a handbrake, but they're not good as a strategy to contain inflation on the long. So I think they'll have to slow or reduce sooner than they think. Otherwise, they become part of the problem, not part of the solution.
Is enough being done in regards to multinational tax avoidance?
Is what, sorry?
Is enough being done in regards to multinational tax avoidance?
The answer to that is yes, and it has been going on now for probably the best part of 15, 20 years. But you've always got to remember that, the dudes that do multinational tax avoidance have very good lawyers. It's not so much they're trying to avoid the tax, they're trying to obviously minimize the tax, which is legal. And sometimes they step too far over the line, and sometimes they're taking positions, of advice that the advice may be a bit dubious. But, don't be under any illusion that the ATO and the governments aren't spending a lot of energy in this space. They are. It just sometimes it can take many, many years for them to identify, research, gather the information, review the law, apply the law, interpret the law, question it, then argue the position, and then come to an outcome. So, there's no one that is theoretically hiding the money under the bed, right? It's just a situation whether their interpretation and application agrees with the ATOs, and whether sometimes, in fact, the law needs to be changed. Because the hard thing for governments is they're always going to be a bit behind the 8 ball, and particularly when you look at things like the digital currency. One of the things that had to be announced in this budget was cryptocurrency had to be formally acknowledged that it's not a foreign currency, because there's a different tax treatment for foreign currency as there is for digital currency. But when laws were written, there was no cryptocurrency. It didn't exist. When there wasn't derivatives, there wasn't a lot of things. There wasn't even that many multinationals. So the law is often behind the 8 ball. And even when you get a government like this one and previous governments that are keen to change, it can take them years to draft the legislation. And by the time they've drafted it, things have changed and they have to redraft it again. So don't ever be worried that they're not chasing it. They are. They want the revenue. And there's been an international convention just recently where all the governments in the world agreed that they would have a minimum corporate tax rate of 15% to soften the impact of these tax avoidance countries and stuff like that. That's going to take a few years to bring into play, but that's going to make it a little bit easier as well. But they're certainly chasing it. Don't be under any disillusion that they're not.
Will tax on an individual's superannuation gain traction, or was this media hype leading into the budget?
Your individual superannuation is already taxed. So the earnings on the fund and the contributions that you get a tax deduction are already taxed. The thing is, the industry is so huge that even a small 1-2% increase in the tax is an enormous amount of revenue. So it's going to be interesting to see if governments are ever greedy enough to turn to that and look for it. But they're now making so much money, they don't need to really increase the tax rate on the superannuation. And one of the reasons I say that is because they're increasing the amount of contributions into superannuation, and every time they increase the contributions, they get more tax revenue by the fact they get 15% more of that contribution. So I think that they're getting it by default, and that is good enough for them. And I think they're happy with that level. I think it's a big thing. Superannuation is going to be a nation shaper, and I think that's another reason why in the future governments won't be looking at it as a tax cow. They'll look at it as a bank, and they'll go, just like they are now with the housing. In the summit is the superannuation institutions. They're one of the groups at the table saying, hey, how do we get you to invest that superannuation money into affordable housing? Because you guys have got trillions, right? So I think you're going to see the relationship change from, oh, look, how do we get more tax out of that, to, oh, look, how do we get that money to be more productive in the economy?
We'll wrap it up there. Thank you so much, Steve. We'll get this recording of the webinar out to everyone, as I said, in the next couple of days. So thank you for all your questions. And just a reminder, if you do want any tax advice or financial advice, property advice, investment advice, please email paul@smats.net and we'll be in contact. Thank you very much. Have a lovely evening.
Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it. Bye-bye.